The First World War is a threshold that forever changed the course of human history. It was not merely a conflict between nations or a clash of empires. It was the moment when humanity first faced the consequences of its own progress. Before 1914, people believed that scientific development would bring prosperity, innovation, and technologies meant to improve life. Yet the same industrial revolution that created remarkable tools of production suddenly became the creator of remarkable tools of destruction. When Europe stepped into the war, no one could imagine what it would become. Generals hoped for a quick and decisive campaign. Newspapers confidently wrote that the war would be over by Christmas. Soldiers marched to the front with smiles, having no idea they were stepping into an era defined by fear, suffering, and death. Technologies that seemed part of the distant future appeared unexpectedly on the front lines of the bloodiest conflict the world had ever seen. To counter them, Allies created convoys, merchant ships sailing together under destroyer protection. Hydrophones, depth charges, and early sonar appeared. The first undersea arms race began, a race that would later determine the course of World War II. But war technologies did not only kill, they changed medicine. Doctors used X rays for the first time. Mobile field hospitals were developed, nurses became trained professionals. Techniques for treating shock, performing blood transfusions, disinfecting, and closing wounds advanced dramatically. Even psychology evolved. Soldiers who survived bombardments suffered tremors, panic, hallucinations. Known then as shell shock, today it is called PTSD. This was the moment humanity first recognized that war destroys not only the body but the mind. Finally, the technologies of war reshaped civilization itself. Railways moved millions of troops, factories produced millions of shells. Communication became instantaneous. States transformed into vast mobilization machines. World War I built the foundations of the 20th century. Every major technology of modern warfare, tanks, airplanes, submarines, chemical weapons, helmets, radios, began its journey here. And perhaps the darkest lesson is this: the smarter humanity becomes, the deadlier its wars grow. At the start of the war, airplanes were little more than fragile toys, slow, unstable, flimsy, but militaries quickly understood whoever controls the air controls the battlefield. Pilots began by photographing enemy positions. Then they dropped grenades. Soon they mounted machine guns, and thus the first dogfights were born. The earliest challenge seemed simple. How do you fire forward without destroying your own propeller? The answer came from engineer Anthony Fokker. He invented the synchronizer gear, allowing bullets to pass between spinning propeller blades without hitting them. It was a miracle of engineering. Planes became lethal. Aces emerged. The Red Baron became a legend. Pilots in scarves, leather jackets, and goggles filled newspapers. They were called Knights of the Sky. They lived short lives, but their stories became immortal. Dogfights grew fast, dynamic, deadly. For the first time, humanity saw machines battling in the clouds. It was the beginning of a new era, one in which air superiority would shape the outcomes of future wars. Meanwhile, another battlefield lay beneath the waves. Submarines, U-boats became the Allies' nightmare. Germany used them as a weapon of economic strangulation. They sank merchant ships, starving Britain of food and fuel. Torpedoes killed instantly. Crews rarely survived. When U-20 sank the Lusitania, the world shuddered. Over 1,000 people died, including Americans. Yet the war pressed on. U-boats continued destroying ships by the hundreds. They were feared as much as gas. From this impasse emerged an idea that would transform all future wars: the tank. At first, engineers hesitated. A tracked vehicle capable of crossing craters, wide, and trenches sounded like fantasy, but the British War Office believed in the concept. In 1915, the first prototypes appeared: massive metal boxes on tracks, unpredictable, prone to breakdowns, stalling, or catching fire. Yet the idea was so powerful that development continued. On September 16th, 1916, near Flers-Courcelette, the first British Mark I tanks rolled onto the battlefield. They moved slowly toward German lines, lumbering, clanking, almost mythical. For soldiers, it was like watching mechanical beasts. German machine guns could not penetrate their armor. Infantry advanced behind them. Shock rippled across the front. Though early tanks were imperfect, their arrival marked a revolution. France soon created the Renault FT, the first tank with a rotating turret light, maneuverable, easily manufactured. It became the blueprint for every future tank. Even Germany, late to the game, produced its own armored machines, the A7V. Heavy and powerful, did not arrive in time to shift the war, but symbolized a clear truth: the future of warfare belonged to mechanization. But the ground was not the only battlefield. Technology rose into the sky, but generals refused to believe it. They kept ordering attacks, convinced that this time would be different. Yet the machine gun triumphed again and again. It became the guardian of the trenches and the greatest killer on the Western Front. But its reign was only the beginning. The machine gun turned the battlefield into a stalemate. To break this deadlock, armies turned to artillery, the most devastating machine of mass destruction in the war. Artillery had existed for centuries, but World War I transformed it into a monster the world had never imagined. Before offensives, Allied guns bombarded German lines for weeks. The earth trembled under millions of shells. Men hiding in dugouts went mad from the constant thunder. Some went deaf forever. Others developed trench tremor, what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Shells tore up the ground so violently that battlefields became oceans of mud and craters. In places, the terrain was so churned that soldiers physically could not advance. They got stuck in mud, drowned in flooded holes, broke limbs climbing shattered earth. Artillery killed more soldiers than any other weapon. It obliterated trenches, forests, villages, but it also created landscapes so inhospitable that further attacks became impossible. But the most horrifying part was that gas became normal. Armies used it thousands of times. Soldiers wore gas masks as routinely as boots or coats. Removing the mask for even a few minutes could mean death. Gas alarms became just another part of daily life, like breakfast or the nightly bombardments, yet chemical warfare was only the first step in a long chain of technological horrors. The next was the machine gun, an invention that completely erased the old idea of a heroic charge. Before the war, people imagined battle as forward motion, bravery, sprint, impact, hand-to-hand combat. The machine gun made all of this meaningless. It turned any group of advancing men into targets. When hundreds of soldiers in gray, blue, or khaki coats climbed out of trenches and moved across open ground, the machine gun turned those fields into seconds of slaughter. A single crew, 2 or 3 men, could stop a company, a battalion, an entire attacking wave. On the Somme, British soldiers advanced in formation, like on parade grounds, rifles in hand, straight posture. On the other side, German machine gunners sat behind concrete bunkers watching. When the British rose from their trenches and marched forward, German guns opened fire. In the first 30 minutes alone, tens of thousands of men were killed, wounded, or went missing. It was the moment commanders finally realized the old methods of war were dead. One of the first and most terrifying innovations was poison gas, an invention that did not simply kill but shattered the human psyche. Gas has no sound, no shape, no direction. It does not resemble a bullet or a shell, it attacks the body from the inside. When German forces unleashed chlorine at Ypres in April 1915, the world witnessed a scene impossible to forget. Soldiers stumbled blindly, choking, foaming at the mouth, collapsing to the ground, crawling in panic and agony. It was a nightmare crafted by chemistry. For the first time in history, science was used not to protect human life, but to extinguish it in the most excruciating ways imaginable. Gas attacks left burns, destroyed lungs, scarred skin, and tormented minds. Survivors suffered for years with blindness, ruined breathing, psychological trauma. Later came mustard gas, the symbol of chemical terror. It seeped into clothing, trenches, bunkers, pores of the skin. Men woke up with horrific blisters on their faces, arms, legs. Doctors did not know how to treat it. The wounds healed for months, often leaving permanent disfigurement. The First World War is a threshold that forever changed the course of human history. It was not merely a conflict between nations or a clash of empires. It was the moment when humanity first faced the consequences of its own progress. Before 1914, people believed that scientific development would bring prosperity, innovation, and technologies meant to improve life. Yet the same industrial revolution that created remarkable tools of production suddenly became the creator of remarkable tools of destruction. When Europe stepped into the war, no one could imagine what it would become. Generals hoped for a quick and decisive campaign. Newspapers confidently wrote that the war would be over by Christmas. Soldiers marched to the front with smiles, having no idea they were stepping into an era defined by fear, suffering, and death. Technologies that seemed part of the distant future appeared unexpectedly on the front lines of the bloodiest conflict the world had ever seen.